The chains clattered against the cobblestones, cold and heavy on her wrists, as the guards hauled her back through the very gates from which she had been cast out. Not sold, not bartered, but dragged back like a common criminal to face the man who had paid a king's ransom for her, only to discard her like refuse a month later. His scent, pine, winter frost, and something anciently predatory, assaulted her before she even saw him, a scent she had spent every night for the past 6 moons trying to forget. Lord Cassian, the alpha of the Onyx Fang pack, stood silhouetted against the unforgiving stone of his keep, his form radiating a fury so potent it cracked the very air. But as she was thrown to her knees before him, her gaze defiant, she saw it was not fury that burned in his silver eyes. It was raw, unadulterated terror. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The wind howled a mournful song around the courtyard, whipping loose strands of her dark hair across her face. Ilara ignored the sting of it, just as she ignored the biting cold that seeped through her thin tunic. Her focus was entirely on the Alpha. He was a statue carved from granite and shadow, broad-shouldered and imposing, yet the rigid set of his jaw and the faint tremor in his hands betrayed the fear she had seen in his eyes. The guards who had dragged her here, hulking men whose loyalty to their Alpha was absolute, shifted uncomfortably, their own fear a palpable scent on the air. They were afraid for him. "Leave us." Cassian's voice was a low growl, rougher than she remembered, as if it had been scraped over gravel. The guards hesitated, their eyes darting between her and their lord. A flicker of impatience crossed Cassian's face, and they bowed their heads in unison before retreating, the heavy wooden doors of the keep groaning shut behind them, sealing Ilara in with the monster who had bought her, broken her, and thrown her away. A monster who was now, inexplicably, afraid. She remained on her knees, the sharp edges of the stones digging into her skin, and waited. Let him speak first. Let him explain this madness. 6 months ago, she had stood on an auction block in the neutral city of Silverwood, a place where desperate families sold what little they had. Her family, crippled by debt and famine, had sold her. A human girl with no dowry, no connections, and a quiet defiance that the auctioneer had spun into a tale of untamed spirit. Lord Cassian, the reclusive and feared Alpha from the northern wastes, had outbid slaver captains and decadent southern lords, paying a sum that could have purchased a small barony. He had brought her here, to this fortress of black stone and perpetual winter. For 1 month she had been his property. He had been a confusing, volatile master, ignoring her for days, then subjecting her to intense, unnerving scrutiny. He had never been cruel in a physical sense, but his presence was an oppressive weight, his silence a constant judgment. And then, as abruptly as he had bought her, he had sent her away. He'd given her a horse, a purse of coins, and a dismissal cold enough to freeze blood. "Your presence is no longer required," he had said, his back to her. She had fled, thinking herself free, the shame of being bought and the sting of being rejected warring within her. She had started a new life in a small, remote village, a life of quiet anonymity, until his guards had kicked down her door this morning. "Get up," he commanded. Ilara rose slowly, her muscles stiff. She met his gaze, refusing to show the fear that fluttered in her own heart. "You cast me out, Lord Cassian." "If you wanted me dead, you could have saved yourself the journey and hired a common assassin." A muscle feathered in his cheek. "If I wanted you dead, you would be a ghost's memory." He took a step closer, and the sheer force of his presence made her want to retreat, but she held her ground. The terror in his eyes was still there, a frantic, hunted look that sat unnervingly on the face of a predator. "I need you." The words were so unexpected, so contrary to the man she knew, that a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You need me? The human trinket you tired of in a month? What could you possibly need from me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze swept over her, not with the possessive assessment of an owner, but with a desperate, searching quality. He looked unwell. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his skin, normally a healthy olive, seemed tinged with gray. He moved with a tightly controlled stiffness, as if every motion caused him pain. "Something is wrong," he said, the admission seemingly torn from him. "The heart of my wolf, it grows cold." Ilara stared at him, bewildered. It was common knowledge that alphas were intrinsically linked to their wolf spirits, the source of their strength, their vitality, their connection to the pack. What does that have to do with me? "The elders have consulted the ancient rites, the seers have cast the bones and read the smoke," he continued, his voice strained. "They all point to the same conclusion. A curse, one that began to fester the day you left. They say, you are the only one who can undo it." Ilara's mind reeled. A curse? Her? She was no sorceress. She was a carpenter's daughter. "That's absurd. I have no magic. I know nothing of curses or healing." "And yet here we are," he bit out, his desperation fraying into anger. He took another step, looming over her. The scent of pine and frost was now mingled with something else, something acrid and sick, like winter decay. "The pack weakens as I weaken." "Our rivals on the eastern border grow bold. They smell my decay on the wind. My time is running out." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural chill radiating from his body. It was a deep, penetrating cold, like that of a tomb. He was dying. The terrifying alpha of the Onyx Fang was dying, and his pack believed she, the girl he had discarded, was his only hope. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her defiance faltering in the face of his raw agony. His silver eyes bored into hers. "I am not asking you to be my mate. I am not offering you a place of honor. I am offering you a contract." He spoke the words as if they were poison on his tongue, his pride warring with his absolute need. "Heal me. Break this curse that drains the life from me. Do this, and you will have your true freedom. Not the cast-off's flight I gave you before, but my sworn protection for the rest of your days. You will have wealth enough to be a queen in any human city you choose. You will never want for anything again." He paused, and the air grew heavy with his unspoken threat. "But if you refuse," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "or if you fail, you will not leave these walls alive. You will be bound to me, and you will share my fate. When the ice takes my heart, you will die with me." There it was, the alpha she remembered. A cage of gold or a cage of bones, but a cage nonetheless. She looked into the eyes of the dying wolf, at the terror and the pain and the sliver of hope he so clearly hated admitting to. To refuse meant certain death. To accept meant walking back into the life of a pawn, her fate tied to a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool for his survival. But a pawn with a chance was better than a corpse. I accept your contract, Ilara said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her soul. But I have a condition. His eyes narrowed. You are in no position to bargain. Then you are in no position to be healed, she countered, a spark of her old fire returning. If I am to be your healer, I am not your property. I am not your slave. I will have access to your libraries, your elders, your lore. I will ask questions, and you will answer them truthfully. I will require resources, and you will provide them without question. I will be treated with respect, not as a prisoner, but as the specialist you claim I am. If you cannot grant me this, then you can let your heart freeze over. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, a taut wire of tension. The wind shrieked, and a flurry of snow danced in the courtyard. Cassian studied her, his expression unreadable. She had expected rage, another threat. Instead, she saw a flicker of something else in his gaze, a reluctant, grudging respect. Very well, he conceded, the words clipped. You will have what you need. My pack's shaman, Lysandra, will be your guide. But do not forget the terms, healer. Succeed, and the world is yours. Fail, and the grave is ours. He turned on his heel and strode toward the keep. Come, the ice does not wait. Ilara took a deep breath, the frigid air burning her lungs, and followed him into the heart of the fortress that was now both her workshop and her prison. The game had changed indeed. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of study and observation. Lysandra, the pack shaman, was a woman as ancient and weathered as the mountains themselves. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, and her eyes, the color of faded sage, held a wisdom that was both comforting and unsettling. She led Ilara to a cavernous library, a circular room in the oldest part of the keep, where scrolls and leather-bound tomes were stacked from floor to ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of dust, dried herbs, and old parchment. Everything we know of our history, our magic, and our maladies is here, Lysandra said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. The answer to the Alpha's affliction must lie within these walls. Ilara spent hours upon hours poring over the texts, her fingers stained with ink and her eyes burning from deciphering the cramped, archaic script. She learned of pack lineage, of spirit bonds, of ancient wars with fey courts and vampire covens. She read of curses that boiled the blood, that turned wolves rabid, that stole memories. But she found nothing that spoke of a heart turning to ice, an entropic chill that unraveled a wolf's very soul. Her healing sessions with Cassian were exercises in strained silence. He would sit in a high-backed chair before the hearth in his private study, while she performed the rudimentary diagnostic rituals Lysandra had taught her. She would burn sacred herbs and read the patterns in the smoke, pass scrying stones over his body to search for magical signatures, and take samples of his blood to examine under a complex crystal lens. He bore her examinations with a stoic patience that was more unnerving than his anger. He never spoke unless she asked a direct question, and his answers were always terse and clipped. "When did you first feel the chill?" she asked one evening, as she studied a drop of his blood on a sliver of quartz. Under the lens, it looked sluggish, the life force within it muted. "A week after you were sent away," he answered, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It began as a weariness, then the cold. Is it constant? It worsens with each passing day. It is a physical cold, but more than that, it's in my soul. When I reach for my wolf, the connection is faint, distant, like hearing a shout through a blizzard." He clenched his fists, the leather of his gloves creaking. My instincts are dulled. My strength wanes. Elara felt a sliver of pity, which she quickly suppressed. Pity was a dangerous emotion to feel for a man who held her life in his hands. There is no external magical signature, no aura of a hex or enchantment. "It's as if this is coming from within you." "It is," he said, his voice flat. "It is my own spirit failing." Not everyone in the pack was content to wait for Elara's cure. Cassian's beta, a wolf named Kael, made his disapproval clear. Kael was younger than Cassian, with a restless energy and an ambition that burned in his dark eyes. He saw Elara not as a healer, but as a human charlatan, a symbol of his alpha's desperation and weakness. He found her alone in the library one night. She was perched on a ladder, reaching for a scroll on a high shelf. "Reading fairy tales, human?" he sneered from the doorway. Elara glanced down at him, her expression neutral. "Seeking solutions, beta, something you seem to have no interest in." He stalked into the room, circling the table where her notes were spread out. "The solution is not in these dusty scrolls. An alpha's strength comes from his will, from his dominance. He is letting this phantom illness consume him, and he brings in you, a discarded toy?" The pack whispers. They see his decline. They see a human wandering our halls as if she belongs here. It is a disgrace. "Your alpha's illness is no phantom," Elara said calmly, climbing down from the ladder. "And my presence here is by his command. If you have an issue with it, take it up with him." Kael's lip curled. "Oh, I will, when the time is right. An alpha who cannot command his own vitality cannot command a pack. Remember that, human. Your fate is tied to a sinking stone." He turned and left as silently as he had appeared, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with Cassian's curse. The threat was clear. Kael was positioning himself, waiting for Cassian to weaken enough to be challenged. Her work was no longer just about saving her own life. It was a race against a coup. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from a book, but from a conversation. Frustrated by her lack of progress, she sought out Lysandra in her herb-scented chambers. "The texts are a dead end," Elara admitted, sinking onto a stool. "There's no precedent for this." Lysandra was grinding something in a mortar, her movements slow and deliberate. "Perhaps you are looking for the wrong thing. You look for a curse that was placed. What if it was a curse that was awakened?" Elara frowned. "What's the difference?" "A placed curse is a hostile spell, an arrow shot from an enemy. An awakened curse is a dormant poison, waiting for a key to unlock it," the old shaman explained. "Something in his bloodline, perhaps. A vulnerability passed down through generations, waiting for the right catalyst." A catalyst? The word echoed in Elara's mind. Cassian had said the chill began a week after she left. The timing was too precise to be a coincidence. "Me," Elara whispered. "I was the catalyst." Lysandra stopped grinding and looked at her, her sage eyes piercing. "The Alpha bought you for a reason, child, not whim. He was drawn to you. Our seers felt a resonance in you, a power you are not aware of. He believed you were a potential mate, one who could strengthen his line. But your energies, when brought so close to his, may have reacted in an unforeseen way. A key turning in a lock we did not know existed. A hidden power? Resonance? It sounded like the fairy tales Kael had mocked, yet it was the first theory that made any sense. Driven by this new line of inquiry, Elara returned to the library and began searching not for curses, but for bloodline vulnerabilities and magical affinities. She pulled down ancient pack genealogies, dusty records of births and matings that went back centuries. Late one night, hidden in a crumbling tome detailing the pack's founding, she found it. It was a footnote, an addendum written in a faded, spidery hand. It spoke of a pact made with a human tribe of healers who lived in the mountains centuries ago. This tribe, the Willowkin, possessed a unique magic, an affinity for absorbing and neutralizing negative energies. The Onyx Fang Pack had offered them protection in exchange for their alliance. The footnote mentioned that the Alpha of that time, Cassian's ancestor, had formed a close bond with the tribe's matriarch. The text was frustratingly vague, but one detail stood out. It said the Willowkin were all marked with a birthmark, a sign of their power, a silver scar in the shape of a willow leaf. Ilara's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her own left shoulder, to the spot just above her collarbone that she had kept hidden her entire life. A place where a delicate, shimmering silver mark, a mark her mother had always called a brand of misfortune, was etched into her skin. A perfect willow leaf. She was a descendant of the Willowkin. The power Lysandra spoke of was real. It was in her blood. And when Cassian had brought her here, her latent magic, her resonance, had interacted with his. But instead of strengthening him, it had awakened something terrible. The sudden crash from the hallway shattered the silence. Ilara jumped, her heart pounding. Heavy footsteps thudded, followed by a guttural snarl and the sharp clang of metal on stone. She rushed to the library door and peered out. Down the torchlit corridor, Kale stood with two other wolves, blocking Cassian's path. The beta held a drawn sword, its tip pointed at his alpha's chest. Cassian was unarmed, his face pale but set in a mask of cold fury. "You are weak, old wolf," Kale snarled, his voice ringing with challenge. "You reek of decay. You shame this pack with your illness and your human pet. It is time for new blood. I, Kale, challenge you for leadership of the Onyx Fang." Cassian didn't even glance at the sword. His eyes, burning with a feverish light, were fixed on his beta. "You are a fool, Kale. You mistake desperation for weakness. You will regret this." "I regret nothing," Kale spat. But before he could make a move, a wave of dizziness seemed to hit Cassian. The Alpha staggered, one hand bracing against the stone wall. An almost invisible shimmer of frost coated the stones where he touched them. Kale saw his opening. He lunged. Ilara didn't think. She acted. She grabbed the heaviest book from the table beside her, a thick, iron-bound codex, and hurled it with all her might. It flew across the room and struck one of Kale's companions squarely in the side of the head. The wolf crumpled to the ground with a groan. The diversion gave Cassian the split second he needed. Despite his weakness, his instincts were still those of an alpha. He sidestepped Kale's clumsy thrust, grabbed the beta sword arm, and twisted. Bones crunched, and Kale screamed, the sword clattering to the floor. Cassian slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressed against Kale's throat. "I am still your alpha," Cassian rasped, his voice dangerously low. The other wolf, seeing his companion down and his leader at Cassian's mercy, backed away, his eyes wide with fear. "You will be judged for this treason, but not tonight." He shoved Kale away, and the beta stumbled back, clutching his broken arm, his face a mask of hatred and pain. He glared at Ilara, a silent promise of retribution in his eyes, before he and his remaining ally fled down the corridor. Cassian stood panting, leaning against the wall for support. The brief explosion of violence had cost him dearly. His face was ashen, and a fine sheen of cold sweat beaded on his brow. His silver eyes found Ilara's in the shadows of the library doorway. "Thank you," he breathed, the words seeming to surprise even himself. "He will try again," Ilara said, her own heart still racing. "I know." He pushed himself off the wall, straightening with visible effort. He walked toward her, his steps slow and measured. He stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. "You are more than just a healer, aren't you? There is a fire in you. I saw it at the auction. I see it now." For the first time, she felt he was seeing her, Ilara, not a tool or a symbol or a cure. He was seeing the woman who had just saved his life. A fragile, tentative bridge of understanding seemed to form between them in the silent, torchlit hall. The conflict had, for a moment, made them allies. "My family name is Willow," she said softly, the confession feeling momentous. "My mother told me we were descended from a forgotten line of mountain folk." Cassian's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding dawning in their depths. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently brushed his fingers against the collar of her tunic near her shoulder. Even through the fabric, an icy jolt followed by a strange humming warmth shot through her. A corresponding gasp escaped his lips. "The legends are true," he whispered, a note of awe in his voice. He looked from her shoulder to her eyes. "The curse. Lysandra said it might be a dormant poison in my bloodline. And you are the key." The fragile bridge between them trembled, threatening to collapse under the weight of this revelation. The warmth of their brief alliance was replaced by a sudden, chilling dread. If she was the key, did that also make her the cause? The revelation hung between them, heavy and cold as a shroud. Ilara's lineage, the secret power she never knew she possessed, was not a gift, but the very source of the poison killing him. Cassian took a step back, his expression shifting from awe to a dawning horror, then to a dark, simmering suspicion. The warmth in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by the glacial silver of the predator she first met. "It was you," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The tentative trust they had built, the fragile alliance forged in the face of Kale's betrayal, shattered like glass. "It was always you. Your blood calls to the curse in mine. Bringing you here, it was like holding a flame to a fuse." "I didn't know," Ilara insisted, her voice trembling. She felt a sickening wave of guilt and fear. "Cassian, I swear to you, I had no idea." "Didn't you?" he snarled, advancing on her. The unnatural chill of his curse seemed to intensify, pouring off him in waves. How convenient. The lost little healer, the last of a line that just so happens to hold the key to my bloodline's greatest vulnerability. Were you sent here to finish a war your ancestors started centuries ago? No, my family are carpenters and farmers. They know nothing of this." Her pleas were meaningless to him. All he could see was the betrayal. In his mind, twisted by pain and paranoia, she was no longer a reluctant healer, but a cunning assassin. Her innocence a carefully constructed mask. He saw their entire history in this new, poisoned light. Her presence at the auction, the pull he felt toward her, the month she'd spent in his keep. It was all part of a plan, a long, patient trap, and he had walked right into it. "The curse didn't awaken when you left," he hissed, backing her into the library. "It was activated when you arrived. It was your touch, your presence, your very breath in my halls that condemned me. Sending you away only slowed it, but the poison was already in my veins." He was right. She could feel the terrible truth of it in her bones. Her proximity had been the catalyst. While she had been here, her latent magic had likely been suppressing the worst of it, an unconscious and instinctive act. When she sent her away, that fragile barrier was removed, and the curse had bloomed in the void. Returning had put her back in the role of unwitting suppressor, but it didn't stop the curse's inexorable advance. It only changed the pace of his death. But he was too consumed by his rage and fear to see this nuance. He saw only her as the cause, the weapon being used against him. "You will tell me who sent you," he commanded, his voice rumbling with a power that shook the very shelves of the library. "You will tell me how to break this, or I will tear the knowledge from your soul." "There is no one!" she cried, tears of frustration and terror streaming down her face. "There is only me, and I am as lost as you are." His face was a mask of cold fury. The man who had thanked her minutes ago was gone, replaced by a desperate alpha lashing out at the source of his pain. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron bands. The unnatural cold of his skin burned hers. "Lies!" he roared. He dragged her from the library, his strength terrifying despite his illness. He hauled her through the stone corridors, past stunned guards who dared not intervene. He was heading for the dungeons. "Cassian, please," she begged, stumbling to keep up. "Cale is the enemy. He tried to kill you. We have to fight him together." "Cale is a jackal snapping at my heels," he retorted, not slowing his pace. You are the poison in my heart." He threw open the heavy, iron-banded door to the dungeons and shoved her into the oppressive darkness. The stench of damp stone and despair filled her lungs. He slammed the door shut, the sound of the heavy bolt sliding home, echoing like a death knell. The darkness was absolute, the silence broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of her heart. She was alone, imprisoned. Her one protector was now her jailer, convinced she was his executioner. She sank to the cold, damp floor, wrapping her arms around herself. Cale was free to plot his coup. Cassian was being consumed by the curse, and she, the only one who might have been able to find a solution, was locked away in the dark. This was the lowest point. The fragile hope she had begun to nurture had been utterly annihilated. She was a prisoner, and her only companion was the chilling certainty that she would die in this place, listening to the final icy heartbeats of the Alpha she had been fated to destroy. Time ceased to have meaning in the crushing dark. It was measured in the scuttling of unseen things, the distant drip of water, and the slow, agonizing chill that seeped from the stone into her bones. Ilara drifted between a state of numb despair and frantic, useless thought. She replayed every moment since her arrival, searching for a clue she might have missed, a path not taken. But every road led back to this. Her blood, his curse, their shared doom. Above her, in the world of light and life, Cassian was experiencing his own hell. The confrontation with Ilara had ripped away his last vestiges of control. The betrayal, real or imagined, had fed the curse, giving it a strength it had not possessed before. The ice was no longer creeping, it was racing through him. His movements became sluggish, his thoughts clouded. He locked himself in his throne room, the great hall of the keep, refusing to see anyone. He could feel his connection to the pack, that warm, vital river of collective spirit, thinning to a frozen trickle. And with his weakness came chaos. Kyle, his arm now crudely set in a splint, was not idle. He moved through the pack like a disease, his whispers fanning the flames of fear and discontent. He spoke of the Alpha's madness, of his obsession with the human witch who had clearly ensorcelled him. He spoke of the eastern rivals, the Stone River Pack, and how they were massing at the border. He painted a picture of a leaderless, dying clan and presented himself as the only salvation. Many, fearing the future, began to listen. It was Lysandra who dared to breach the Alpha's self-imposed exile. The guards at the throne room doors tried to stop her, but she fixed them with a stare that had cowed generations of wolves, and they stepped aside. She found Cassian slumped on his throne, a heavy fur cloak wrapped around him, though he shivered uncontrollably. The great hearth was roaring, but it offered no warmth against the chill that emanated from him. The air around the throne was visibly hazy with cold.
"You are a fool, Cassian," she said, her voice devoid of its usual patience. He lifted his head, his eyes clouded with pain. "She is the cause, Lysandra. Her blood is the poison." "Her blood is the key," the shaman corrected sternly. "A key can be used to lock a door or to open it. You have thrown the key into the dungeon and barred the door from the inside. Do you think the curse cares about your pride or your anger? It feeds on it. You are helping it kill you." She stepped closer, her old bones protesting. "I have been reading. Not the lore you know, but the texts my predecessor hid from yours. The texts that speak of the pact with the Willowkin in its entirety." Cassian watched her, a flicker of interest cutting through his pained haze. "The bond between your ancestor and the Willow Matriarch was deeper than the histories admit," Lysandra revealed. "They were lovers. He wished to make her his Luna. But a sorceress, a powerful witch named Morwen, who had desired your ancestor for herself, was consumed by jealousy. She could not curse him directly, his alpha spirit was too strong. So she twisted the very nature of the bond he shared with the matriarch. She wove a new spell, a parasitic curse that would lie dormant in his bloodline, designed to feed on the unique energy of the Willowkin. It was a curse of eternal vengeance, designed so that if his line ever again bonded with hers, it would mean not strength, but destruction. It would turn their own life force against them." The truth settled in the room, cold and hard. It wasn't Ilara's fault. It wasn't even her ancestors. They were both victims of an ancient act of spite. "This sorceress, Morwen," Cassian whispered, the name tasting like ash. "She was thought to be destroyed long ago," Lysandra said. "But a hate as strong as hers does not die easily. I believe she yet lives, her spirit tethered to the curse. With every beat your heart fails to make, she grows stronger." Lysandra placed a wrinkled hand on the throne's arm. "The girl's touch did not activate a curse, my lord. It completed a circuit Morwen designed centuries ago. But that circuit runs both ways. Just as her energy can be used as a conduit for the curse, it is also the only thing that can be used to draw it out. You have imprisoned the only weapon you have against our true enemy." As Lysandra's words echoed in the cold hall, a different kind of drama was unfolding up the kennels. Kale, emboldened by the Alpha's silence, was meeting with a small group of his most loyal followers. But they were not alone. With them stood two wolves Ilara had never seen before, broad, scarred warriors, whose pelts were the mottled gray of Riverstones. They wore the insignia of the Stone River Pack. Cassian, from his throne, was too weak to hear their words, but another, hiding in the shadows of the rafters above, heard everything. It was Fen, a young scout fiercely loyal to Cassian. He listened in horror as Kale finalized his pact. Kale would challenge and kill the weakened Cassian. In return for their support, the Stone River Pack would be given the Southern Territories and, most importantly, access to the Onyx Fang's ancient Moonwell, a source of immense power. The leader of the Stone River Wolves spoke, his voice a low rumble. The Witch Mother will be pleased. She has waited a long time for the onyx fang to fall. She sends her regards and her aid. He handed Kale a small dark vial, a poison to dull the senses, to ensure even a dying wolf has no final bite. Use it before the challenge. Fenn's blood ran cold. The Witch Mother, Morwen. She wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was an active player, allied with their rivals, pulling pale strings. He slipped away from the rafters, his heart pounding with the weight of his discovery, and ran for the throne room. He burst in, ignoring the guards, and fell to his knees before Cassian and Lysandra, gasping out what he had heard. The vial, the Stone River Pack. The alliance with a Witch Mother. Lysandra's face went grim. Morwen, she breathed. The final pieces clicked into place for Cassian. The fog of pain and paranoia finally cleared, replaced by the cold, sharp certainty of the truth. Kale's treachery was deeper than mere ambition. The threat from the east was not a coincidence. And Elara, she was not his enemy. She was the target of an ancient vendetta, just as he was. He had been a blind fool, lashing out at the one person who could save them all. He struggled to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The ice in his veins felt like shards of glass. Every movement was agony. But a fire had been relit in his soul, the cold, hard flame of an alpha's resolve. He had to make it right. He looked at Lysandra, then at Fenn. Guard the hall. Let no one in or out. He turned and strode from the throne room, his steps unsteady, but his purpose absolute. He ignored the pain, the dizzying weakness. He walked the long, cold corridors back to the dungeons. When he reached the iron door, he did not summon a guard. He took the heavy iron key from its hook and, with a trembling hand, turned it in the lock. The door groaned open. A sliver of torchlight cut into the oppressive blackness, revealing Elara huddled against the far wall, her face pale and stained with tears. But her eyes, when they met his, were filled with a defiant fire that had not been extinguished. He stood there, the great and powerful Alpha, leaning against the doorframe for support, his body racked with shivers, his face a portrait of agony and regret. "Elara," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "Forgive me. I was wrong. We have been wrong about everything." He sank to one knee, a gesture of submission so profound for an Alpha that it was like watching a mountain bow. "Our enemy is not each other, and she is coming for us both. I need you, not as my healer, but as my ally." Elara stared at the kneeling Alpha, at the raw plea in his eyes, and knew the crisis had passed. But the true battle, the one for their very survival, had just begun. She rose from the filthy straw, every muscle aching, and stepped out of the darkness into the torchlight. She did not offer him her hand. She did not offer words of comfort or forgiveness. There wasn't time. Forgiveness was a luxury they might earn later, if they lived. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steady and clear, the voice of an ally, not a prisoner. And so he did. Standing there in the cold corridor outside the dungeons, he relayed what Fenn had overheard. Kale's pact with the Stone River Pack, the plan to use poison, and the name that tied it all together, the Witch Mother, Morwen. Lysandra joined them, adding her own knowledge of the ancient curse, explaining the full depth of Morwen's centuries-old vengeance. They were no longer Alpha, healer, and shaman. They were a council of war, united by a truth that was more terrifying than any of their suspicions.
Ilara listened, her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, forming a grim and horrifying picture. Morwen hadn't just laid a curse, she had cultivated it, waiting for the perfect moment to use it to dismantle her old enemy's legacy. Kale was not a mastermind, merely a pawn. His ambition a tool for a far greater power. "She wants the Moonwell," Lysandra said, her voice grave. "It is the source of this pack's spiritual strength. If she gains control of it, her own power will become nearly absolute." "And Kale's challenge is the key to it all," Cassian added, pushing himself to his feet, his face set. "The challenge must take place at the Grand Circle, beside the well. It is pack law. He will use it as a stage to seize power and hand our most sacred site over to our greatest enemy. Then we must use it as our stage," Ilara declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority. Everyone looked at her. The human girl, the discarded property, was now dictating strategy. "We know their plan. We can set a trap." She turned to Lysandra. "The curse. You said my energy is a conduit that runs both ways. Can I draw it out of him?" Lysandra's ancient eyes studied her. "It is possible. The texts speak of a ritual, the heart thaw. It would require you to open yourself completely to the curse, to pull the frozen, entropic magic from the Alpha's soul and into your own." The shaman's next words were heavy. "The texts are unclear on the outcome. They say the power of the Willowkin is to absorb and neutralize. But a curse this old, this potent, it could consume you. It could shatter your soul. It is a terrible risk." "It is a risk I am willing to take," Ilara said without hesitation. "It's a better death than waiting for Kale's assassins or Morwen's victory." A new alliance was forged in that moment, absolute and unspoken. The lies and suspicions were burned away, leaving only a core of desperate shared purpose. They moved to the library, their war room, and began to plan. Cassian, despite his weakness, was a brilliant tactician. Fen, the scout, provided details on the Stone River Pack's numbers and probable location. Lysandra outlined the ritual Ilara would need to perform. And Ilara herself proved to be the linchpin, her clear-headed logic bridging the worlds of magic and strategy. "Kale expects to fight a weakened alpha," she reasoned. "He will use the poison to make you even weaker. Let him." Cassian's eyes narrowed. "You want me to take the poison?" "He will have someone administer it before the challenge, likely in your ceremonial drink. We will have Lysandra prepare an antidote, something to fight the worst of it, but you must appear to be on the verge of collapse. You must draw him in, make him overconfident." Her plan was audacious. The challenge would proceed as Kale expected. But as he fought his supposedly dying alpha, Ilara, concealed nearby, would begin the Heart Thaw ritual. She would draw the curse's power from Cassian, not only healing him, but, hopefully, weakening Morwen, who was tethered to it. The challenge for leadership would become a lure to draw their true enemy into the open. The next 2 days were a blur of tense preparation. Lysandra worked feverishly with her herbs, preparing the antidote and the ritual components for Ilara. Cassian gathered the handful of warriors he knew were still loyal, including Fen, forming a small, secret honor guard. Ilara, meanwhile, committed the dangerous ritual to memory, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her resolve a burning fire. During this time, she and Cassian worked side by side, their earlier animosity replaced by a quiet, focused respect. One evening, as they reviewed a map of the Grand Circle, he paused and looked at her. "What you are doing, risking your own life for this pack, for me, after what I did to you." He shook his head, the words failing him. "Why?" Ilara met his gaze. Because this is bigger than you and me, Cassian. It's bigger than my anger or your pride. Morwen and Kael would see this whole pack enslaved or destroyed. I was sold once. I will not stand by and watch hundreds of others suffer the same fate. A profound, unspoken understanding passed between them. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His skin was still cold, but it was the cold of a winter morning, not the deathly chill of the grave. It was the first time he had touched her without aggression or clinical detachment. It was the touch of a partner. The day of the challenge arrived. A grim pall hung over the keep. The sky was the color of bruised plums, and a heavy snow began to fall. As custom dictated, Kael, flanked by his supporters and his Stone River allies, formally issued his challenge in the Great Hall. Cassian, looking gaunt and frail, accepted. Before they departed for the Grand Circle, a ceremonial chalice was brought to Cassian. He took it, his eyes briefly meeting Ilara's where she stood in the shadows with Lysandra. He drank deeply, playing his part to perfection, then allowed a shudder to rack his body, stumbling slightly as he handed the chalice back. Kael watched, a smirk of triumph on his face. The pack marched to the Grand Circle, a ring of ancient standing stones on a wind-swept plateau. At its center was the moon well, its water shimmering with a faint, ethereal light. Ilara and Lysandra slipped away from the procession, circling around to a small, hidden cave that overlooked the circle, its entrance obscured by a tangle of frost-covered briars. This would be Ilara's ritual site. The combatants entered the circle, stripped to the waist despite the biting cold. Kael looked strong, confident, his broken arm bound tightly to his chest. Cassian seemed to sway on his feet, his breathing labored. The pack formed a silent, watching perimeter. "The time of the dying wolf is over," Kael bellowed, raising his axe. "The Onyx Fang needs a true alpha." He charged. The fight began. It was brutal and one-sided. Cassian, hampered by the poison and the curse, was slow, his movements clumsy. He could only parry and dodge, taking shallow cuts to his arms and ribs. He was being worn down, bled out. Kael toyed with him, enjoying his victory before it was even won. In the cave, Ilara knelt within a circle of glowing runes Lysandra had painted on the floor. "It is time," the shaman whispered. Ilara closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, with her very soul. She followed the thread of the curse that linked her to Cassian. She found the core of it, the knot of frozen, stagnant energy coiled around his heart, and she pulled. The backlash was instantaneous and excruciating. It felt as if 1,000 shards of ice were being driven into her spirit. A scream tore from her throat, but she bit it back. The cold flooded her, a torrent of despair, pain, and ancient hatred. She could feel Morwen's malevolent consciousness within it, a chilling, triumphant presence. But then something else happened. The magic of her blood, the power of the Willowkin, rose to meet it. It was a gentle, persistent warmth, a light that did not flinch from the darkness. It began to surround the icy energy, not fighting it, but absorbing it. Down in the circle, Cassian felt the shift. A wave of agonizing cold washed over him, a final, desperate clenching of the curse. He fell to one knee. Kael laughed, raising his axe for the final blow. But then a surge of warmth and strength flooded Cassian's limbs. The ice receded. The poison's fog lifted. He could feel his wolf again, howling in his soul, whole and strong and furious. He looked up just as Kael's axe began its descent. His silver eyes were no longer clouded with pain. They were blazing with renewed power. He moved with a speed that shocked everyone.
He caught the axe haft in one hand, stopping it dead. With his other hand, he drove his fist into Kale's chest, sending the beta flying backward. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Kale stared, his face a mask of disbelief. Cassian rose to his full height, no longer the dying wolf, but the avenging alpha. At that same moment, a shriek of pure rage echoed across the plateau, coming not from the circle, but from the trees at its edge. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in black, her face a pale mask of fury. Morwen. "The power is mine!" she screeched, her eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. She had felt her connection to the curse being severed, her power source being stolen. "You will not take it from me, little willow wren." She ignored the duel entirely. Her true target was the source of the interference. She raised her hands, and a bolt of sickly green energy shot from her fingertips, not toward Cassian, but straight at the hidden cave where Ilara was performing the ritual. Cassian saw it. He saw the witch, he saw the attack, and he understood. In that split second, he had no thought for Kael, no thought for the pack or the challenge. There was only Ilara. He abandoned the fight and ran, putting himself between Morwen's magic and the cave. He moved faster than he ever had in his life, a silver blur of pure protective instinct. He reached the spot an instant before the bolt of energy, raising his arms to shield the entrance as the curse fire struck him. The impact threw him back against the rock face, and he roared in agony as the foul magic seared him. But he had bought her the time she needed. Inside the cave, Ilara felt the last of the curse flow into her. The torrent of icy hatred was immense, enough to shatter any normal soul. But she was a heart thaw. Her magic did not break, it transformed. It took the centuries of cold, malevolent energy and converted it, alchemizing hatred into power. A brilliant silver light erupted from her, pouring out of the cave entrance in a blinding wave. The light washed over the grand circle. It was not hot or cold, but it was pure, cleansing energy. It struck Morwen, and the witch screamed as her ancient form, sustained for so long by the curse's dark power, dissolved into dust and shadows. It washed over the traitorous stone river wolves, who cried out in terror and fled into the wilderness. It washed over the Onyx Fang pack, filling them not with fear, but with a sense of profound peace and awe. Kael, forgotten in the chaos, stared at the empty space where his powerful ally had been. His gamble had failed. His treason was exposed. He dropped his axe and fell to his knees, utterly defeated. The light subsided. Silence descended on the snow-covered plateau. Cassian pushed himself to his feet. His body burned and aching, but his heart was warm. The curse was gone. He turned to the cave. Ilara emerged, staggering into the daylight. She was pale, drained, and trembling from exertion, but she was alive. Her eyes, filled with the residual silver light of her power, found his across the frozen ground. He rushed to her side, catching her as her knees gave way. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her, his face buried in her hair. He was no longer touching a tool or a contract partner. He was holding his savior, his ally, his everything. The pack, his loyal warriors, and Kael's shamed followers alike watched in silence. Then, one by one, they knelt. They did not kneel to their alpha alone. They knelt to the human woman in his arms, the witch of the Willowkin who had saved them all. The auction was a ghost of a memory. The contract was a puff of smoke. In the heart of the grand circle, surrounded by their kneeling pack, a new covenant was forged.
Not in words, but in a shared glance of sacrifice, survival, and a future they would now build together. Weeks turned into a season. The snows of the confrontation melted, giving way to the stubborn green of a northern spring. The Onyx Fang pack, under the dual leadership of their restored alpha and the woman they now called the Heart Thaw, began to heal. Kyle and his closest co-conspirators were exiled, a punishment of mercy that Cassian granted at Alara's request. The Stone River Pack, their leadership shattered by Morwen's demise, sued for peace, signing a treaty that favored the Onyx Fang for generations to come. Alara never returned to the library as a researcher. She walked the halls of the keep not as a prisoner or a temporary guest, but as its mistress. The pack members, who had once viewed her with suspicion, now approached her with a reverence that still felt strange. They brought her their disputes, their sick children, their hopes. She was not their Luna in the traditional sense of a mated she-wolf, but she was something more. Their anchor, their sage, the calm center to Cassian's storm. One evening, she stood on the high battlements of the keep, looking out as the sun bled orange and purple across the rugged peaks. The air was clean and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and new pine growth. A heavy fur cloak was draped over her shoulders, a familiar weight. A moment later, Cassian came to stand behind her, his presence a comforting warmth that wrapped around her before his arms did. He enfolded her, pulling her back against his chest. His scent was no longer a discordant clash of frost and decay. The winter chill was gone, replaced by the smell of pine, hearth fire, and home. "You are a long way from the carpenter shop," he murmured, his chin resting on her shoulder. She smiled faintly. "And you are a long way from the dying wolf on his throne." "Thanks to you." His voice was quiet, stripped of all its former arrogance, leaving only a deep, sincere gratitude that still humbled her. "The contract I offered you, wealth, protection, freedom, it is still yours for the taking. I would see you a queen in any city you choose, if that is your wish." Alara leaned back against him, looking out at the vast, wild territory that had almost become her tomb and was now her home. She thought of the life she had scraped out for herself after he'd cast her away, the quiet, lonely anonymity. She thought of the fear, the anger, the betrayal. And she thought of the fierce, desperate alliance they had forged in the dark, the trust they had built in the face of certain death. "And what would you do if I left?" she asked softly. He was silent for a moment. "I would rule," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "I would lead this pack, but my heart, which you so painstakingly thawed, would be a very cold and empty place." She turned in his arms, her hands coming to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. She looked up into his silver eyes, once filled with terror and rage, and saw they now held only a deep, abiding peace and a love that was as wild and boundless as the lands around them. "I was sold at an auction and called back to be a healer," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I think I was really just called home." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that held no dominance or desperation, but was a seal on a new covenant, a promise of a new beginning. As the first stars pricked the twilight sky, the Alpha and the Heart Thaw stood together on the battlements, no longer defined by a curse or a contract, but by the shared future they had won, a future stretching out before them, vast and bright. The woman once sold was now finally free, and she was queen of it all.